What is going on, ballers? It's your boy MJ coming at you with another episode of the Fantasy Fumble. Hope you all are doing great today, my friends. I hope you had a great fantasy week last week. We're coming at you with some great information and news. And before we get into that, Joe, how the hell you doing today, brother?
I'm doing pretty well. It was a rough week for me. Lost a lot more than I won. And I wish these injuries would stop, but they're not. So got to roll with the punches.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure these guys are looking forward to finding out what guys we're going to go into detail with today, especially with all these injuries and bye weeks. But before we get into the news and notes, a word from our sponsors.
Hey there. My name is Manny James Gonzalez with PRB, and I'm a real estate agent here in Central Florida. I'm a U.S. Navy veteran, military relocation pro, and big supporter of 2A and veterans' rights. My specialty is VA transactions. I'm also experienced in all parts of real estate.
I've been living in Florida for over 20 years, and I can tell you we still believe in freedom down here. One of the greatest job markets, excellent economy, and no state income tax. When it comes to an agent, you want one that's going to be honest, not afraid of a fight, and most importantly, willing to do the things that some agents aren't willing to do.
And what's that, Manny?
Shoot straight, Dan. If you're ever considering buying in Central Florida, you need somebody you can trust, and I got your six. I'm Manny James Gonzalez, finding land for the free and home for the brave.
Welcome back, ballers. Let's get into some news and notes. Now, I'm sure you've all heard that Cam Scatterbo is out for the rest of the season with an ankle injury. And unfortunately, running back Quinshon Judkins also hurt his shoulder. And it's something that is minor, but day-to-day right now, so you got to keep your eyes peeled, pay attention to them. Running back Saquon Barkley, he had a minor groin injury and allegedly could have returned to the game if it were closer. So they don't think it's serious, but, there's a bye week, so keep your eye on that. Kansas City Chiefs running back Isaiah Pacheco is considered week to week, not day to day, but week to week, following an MCL sprain. And Terry McLaurin, in that same game, departed in the second half with a quad injury. And apparently that's the same quad that he was having issues with earlier this season, which cost him 4 games. And Brock Purdy and Ricky Pearsall, we've heard this before, but they are in line to play in week 9. Unfortunately, Brandon Ayuk is still nowhere close, according to head coach Kyle Shanahan. Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson are in line to play this week, so hopefully that's the case for both of them. Quarterback Michael Penix Jr. and quarterback Joe Flacco are also considered day-to-day. And Vikings quarterback Carson Wentz, well, backup quarterback, is out for the rest of the season, but J.J. McCarthy should be back this week. And New Orleans Saints quarterback Tyler Show will start in place of Spencer Rattler. Not like you're rostering either one of those guys, but something to think about for the rest of the players on the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, there's a lot of injuries, man. Luckily, some of the guys you mentioned, right, their counterparts of their handcuffs are on bye weeks, right? So good opportunity if you have that extra space and stash. So, for example, if you have Saquon stash, Tank Bigsby. If you have Judkins, you need to get Dylan Sampson, right? So those are a couple guys to be on the lookout for, but they're not going to change your league result. They're just going to give you that 1 or 2 week spot fill in.
But that's a very good point, though, is they're not going to be on anyone's radar because of the bye week. So when people look at projections, they're not going to see these players at the top of the list because it's going to say 0. So you can sneak them in if you've got an extra roster spot. I definitely think it's worth rostering both backups.
Oh, yeah, especially if you have the primary backs.
Yeah.
Well, ballers, let's get into our trade targets now. Now, for my trade targets, it's I've talked about him before, but he's somebody that you could still buy low on. because he has yet to have his breakout, but that's Ted McMillan for the Carolina Panthers. I mean, he's had a quarterback carousel. Hopefully, Bryce Young is back. But if you look at his games, he's played 8 games already. He has 37 receptions on 63 targets. So if you do the math, that's 7.8, 7.9 targets per game. So rounding him up, he's getting 8 targets a game. And that offense is a run-first offense. So I think once they start having more success with the pass, obviously he'll end up doing better. But for somebody that's only, played 8 games, half the season, he already has 512 yards. So he's on track to get over 1,000. So if you're getting a guy like that, you pay a wide receiver 3 number, something like, not a ridiculous starter, but you might be able to package him in and get him with someone else. But, I definitely like that workflow and what he's getting. I think that it's only going to continue to get better as that chemistry continues to grow with his quarterback.
I'm glad you brought him up because I know we've talked about him a couple times already, but I still think he's very underrated. The guy's getting double-digit fantasy points almost every game, and I believe that he is overlooked mostly because he's on the Carolina Panthers. But they've surprised everyone this year. They're 4-4. They're a better team than we thought, and I see him just being on a steady incline for the rest of the season. And I really do. I know I said this a couple weeks ago, but I really do think you got to get him now because, time's running out before people start catching on. Wow, this guy's the real deal.
Exactly.
Now, the first guy I want to talk about for a trade target could possibly be on waivers. So if he's on waivers, just pick him up. But I'm going to go over a couple reasons why I think you should target Tyjae Spears. Again, there's a good chance he's on waivers, but he could have a bigger impact over the second half of the season. One, he's a good football player, and his opportunities have been increasing a little bit over the last 4 weeks. He was injured the first month of the season, and the last 4 weeks he's been getting a bigger workload. And last week he finished with 12 touches and 82 total yards and a touchdown. And second, the Titans are 1-6. So they may want to give Spears more touches as the season continues, basically just giving him some real-time practice reps. Obviously you should not offer very much for this trade. Just a bench player you don't plan to use very much. But I do think he's going to get more, like a bigger workload as the season progresses. And obviously finding the end zone is difficult. It's something that you don't want to see for your starting or your starting running back. But if you can have him as a flex player on a bye week, I think he could be a pleasant surprise. And especially if the Titans continue losing, I feel like they're just going to feed him the ball even more. Just to, hey, we need to get you some reps. Now's the time.
Yeah, and I watched a little bit of that Tyjae Spears played last week, and he definitely looks really healthy. He looks quick. He's really moving methodically. And also he just looks better all around than Tony Pollard this year. I think it has to do with injuries, of course, for Pollard, but he never was a durable guy to begin with. So Tyjae Spears could definitely be a sneaky play.
And their workload it's almost split, So in recent weeks. So if you watch the tape with Pollard, like you said, he's just kind of, what you're getting, 10 to 12, and it's not exciting.
Now, for my other trade target, I was looking at a gentleman by the name of Zay Flowers. He's somebody that I think is in the same trajectory as Ted McMillan, someone that's getting overlooked. He hasn't had Lamar Jackson for the last 4 or 5 weeks, right? And Lamar Jackson was a full participant this week. So if you're going to make a play for him, you have to do it now because even without Lamar Jackson, he already has 41 receptions on 55 targets for the year. He's only played 7 games, keep in mind. So that's on pace 7. You're looking at 8 targets per game, and he already has 486 yards. So I know that he has that extreme boom capability where you'll see him get over 150 yards last year, right? And something crazy. I just think he's somebody that's going to get here eventually. So you need to take advantage of it now while it's still early, because I don't think the Ravens themselves are ready to throw in the towel for the season. So to me, that means they want to compete, and there's no one else on that team that's going to take away any targets away from him. So
Yeah, I agree that the Ravens do want to compete. They're 2-5, but that win last week was huge to keep them in the run. And I agree, man. There's really no one else on that team that you want to roster as far as a wide receiver. So, the 3 years ago, Zay Flowers was boom or bust, and it was usually bust. And then last year, he started taking form. And this year, man, like you said, I actually didn't even really realize he was averaging 8 targets a game. That's huge. That in itself should be reason enough to roster someone. And when he's the only wide receiver on a very, all right, pause, maybe not very good football team, but when he's on a good football team, who generally speaking, Baltimore is a legit football team. And I think they are going to be much better throughout the second half of the year. He could really explode. A guy I want to talk about is another wide receiver for the New York Giants, and that's Wan'Dale Robinson. He's always been a target monster, speaking of targets. But a lot of the short passes were going to Cam Scatterbo over the last few weeks. And unfortunately, Cam is out for the rest of the season. And most of those targets will probably go to Tyrone Tracy now. But Wan'Dale will definitely be involved in the short yardage game. That's his thing. We've seen him catch a lot of deep balls this year, which is surprising. But that's his thing. If you look at his targets last year, he was through the roof. He had an insane amount of targets, and they were always just really short passes to get you 5 or 6 yards. They were looking for first downs, and he's a slot receiver. He gets the shovel passes and things like that. But the fact that he can actually be a deep threat from time to time is something that I think is just going to be overall very good for this New York Giants offense, who's been surprisingly good, and also just him as a player overall. Last year, the only thing you could count on him was the short game. Now you've got the short and long, and I think he's going to be a lot more involved in the short game. Last week was a dud, so I think it's a great time to get him on your team. You just kind of say, hey, look, Darius Slayton's back in the mix. Last week was a dud. Let me just get a flex player. And he could end up being a wide receiver too for the rest of the season, like a solid wide receiver too.
Yeah, I like Wan'Dale. He definitely has an improvement on a quarterback over last year, right? Going from Daniel Jones to him. Not saying Daniel Jones is not a good quarterback, because obviously he's showing that right now in Indianapolis, but more like he just wasn't good for that system, right?
Yes, so I think it just does come down to the system a lot of times with these quarterbacks.
And then who else is going to be taking targets over there, man? Like Neighbors out for the year. I think the Giants are still going to want to compete too. That's just a competitive nature of certain teams. And so you're right. He could be a sneaky play for the rest of the season here.
And he's been good so far, and I just feel like he's going to get better. Now let's get into our hot matchups. I'll kick things off. My hot matchup this week, one team that we were just talking about, I got the Ravens versus the Dolphins. As we mentioned, the Ravens should finally have Lamar back in the mix. And as we talked about, they're going to play hard to stay in playoff contention. And the Dolphins defense was surprisingly good last week, but they've been really bad overall. Let's get serious. So this should be a tasty matchup for Lamar, Derrick Henry, and Zay Flowers. And maybe Mark Andrews will put up some decent numbers this week too, but obviously I wouldn't play him. And the Dolphins offense looked good last week too. And aside from a few games, Baltimore's defense has been really bad this season. I do think their defense is going to get better, but I feel like there are going to be some growing pains along the way. And Achane and Waddle should obviously be in your lineups. But I would only play Tua or Malik Washington if you're truly desperate for a roster spot, because even though they look good last week, they're not a reliable start. And again, the Dolphins offense is all over the place. So the only ones that you can start with confidence are Achane and Waddle. But the Baltimore defense is bad, man. We expected, Steelers defense and Baltimore defense, we expected them to be at top form this year, and they're just not.
Yeah, they've been struggling, that's for sure. So, let's see what the Dolphins do, right? That's my big, possibility where I'm not so confident is Miami, right? But they did look good last game, so maybe they turned it around. Now, for my hot matchup of the week, I ended up going with a really popular game that probably everyone has circled. That's going to be the Chiefs versus the Bills in Buffalo. Obviously, it's in Buffalo Stadium. It's going to be loud. Weather's cooling off a little bit, so it's going to be gritty. And, it's going to have some real fireworks there. So on the Bills side, obviously, for wide receivers, it's hit or miss, right? Last week, it was Khalil Shakir. Next week, it could be Keon Coleman, right? So you don't really know on that aspect. Or even Dalton Kincaid, right? That's that rotation there with one of those three guys. However, on the offensive side of the ball, we know James Cook is going to touch that ball, right? Last week, he had 212 yards and 2 touchdowns. And let's be honest, he would have had 4 touchdowns if it wasn't for Josh Allen trying to get a couple scores in that game. You guys saw it, like at the 1-yard line, Cook gets him up there, they pass it, or they let Josh Allen sneak it in. So that's just the way the team operates. Either way, I know there's plenty of stuff to go around, and the way he's been bursting through the hole, you just can't stop. Now, on the other hand, Josh Allen obviously must start every week, top 5 quarterback all week long. 3 touchdowns last week. He's going to replicate that against the Chiefs, I think. Not necessarily in the same fashion. I think for the Chiefs, you got to beat them in the air because obviously on the ground, they're going to shut it down. So I don't think that they'll shut it Cook down, however, but I think that, Cook's probably going to be involved more in screen passes and stuff like that, right? More swing passes. Now, on the other side, Mahomes has been QB1 all year long, right? Like the guy is averaging a ridiculous 26, 27 points per game in fantasy PPR. The guy's already got 2,100 passing yards and 17 touchdowns with only 4 picks. So he's been playing lights out. And last week he did have 2 of those 4 picks, but he did bounce back and take the game back over. Now, of course, you can't talk about the Chiefs without talking about the wide receivers, right? Xavier Worthy, he's not somebody that, I'm going to be happy to start with, but I'll put him at my flex. However, Rashid Rice has been on an absolute tear since he's been back. He has last week he had 9 receptions on 9 targets, 93 yards and a touchdown. So that's amazing. And if you look at already the past 2 games he's been back, he has 16 receptions on 19 targets, which means he's just about getting 10 targets a game, right? Mahomes is looking for him. He's looking for him often, and there's no better red zone threat than him right now. And that is also considering Kelsey is on the team because Kelsey doesn't seem to be the red zone guy anymore. So I just expect it to be back and forth, a couple big plays here and there, and it's going to have everybody on the edge of their seats. So get as many players as you can. That's all I can say.
I hope we do get some weather just because that's always exciting to see, a possibility of a snow game. But yeah, another thing is, although Pacheco hasn't really done much, he did, as we discussed during news and notes, he did injure his knee and could be out this week. It's likely that he's out this week and could possibly be out for a couple weeks. So Kareem Hunt, there's a possibility he's on the waiver wire and you could scoop him up and he'd be an automatic start because it's going to be a high scoring game and he's the RB1 now.
And when we say RB1, guys, we don't mean like he's a top running back available. We're just saying he's the best running back on that team right now.
Yes.
So don't get too literal.
And like you were saying, man, like with the Bills, it's a crapshoot for their wide receivers. Honestly, I would feel a lot more confident starting Dalton Kincaid than any of their receivers. I know it sounds a little funny, but it's just the truth.
It's honestly, if it's not James Cook or Josh Allen, who the hell knows, right? So but I still expect them to score. And the way they play, both teams play is they spread the ball around. So it might be a touchdown to Juju Smith-Schuster, it might be one to Keon Coleman. It could, it's going to be whoever's open basically in that scheme.
Yeah, with the receivers on both teams, you don't know who you're going to get aside from Rashid Rice.
Now let's get into our cold matchups of the week. Now I'm going to lead things off this time, Joe. Cold matchups. it's always, hard to find which NFL team is going to be the least, effective this week. So I had to take a look, and I actually I picked a game that actually has one of the highest score spreads for the week. They are at 48.5. This is the 49ers versus the Giants. I don't know why Vegas has them so high scoring. Obviously, I know they expect Dax and Dart to throw all over the Niners. I don't think the Niners defense is that bad. I think they're middle of the pack. So I don't expect there to be fireworks. But Vegas actually has that at the same spread as the Lions versus the Vikings. So it's actually the second highest managed spread there is. And to me, that says all the makings for a trap game. You're going to have a game where, for example, 49ers, if Purdy doesn't play, you play Mac Jones, who's going to be making the points, right? I mean, obviously, besides CMC, there's really not going to be anybody else that you're really going to say, hey, this is the guy on 49ers. Same thing with, on the other side for the Giants, right? We talked about Wan'Dale Robinson. He'll get some looks, but beyond that, who are you really going to start? So to me, a lot of people are going to be playing that game because they think it's going to be like no defense and easy scoring, and I just think it's going to be the opposite. It's going to be ugly, slow, sloppy, and just a terrible game to put any props on.
Yeah, and unfortunately, both those teams have been a little sloppy this year, especially the Niners. But I didn't realize the over-under was that high. That's a little confusing to me, too. Obviously, Vegas knows some things we don't, but that was surprising to hear. And you don't know who's going to come off the bench at wide receiver. If we're actually going to get Pearsall back in the mix, if we see Kendrick Bourne on the field, you don't know if he's going to hit or miss. Jawan Jennings, you don't know if he's going to hit or miss. I'd say Kittle's a good start. Brock Purdy, I mean, he's been out for a month, so you might want to lower your expectations if you're going to start him. And yeah, man, with the Giants, I think Jackson Dart's a good start, and I do like Wan'Dale, but outside of those two, there's not really anyone I'm looking forward to starting on the Giants either. Tyrone Tracy's probably going to give you a solid 12 points, maybe 15, but he's not your typical starting running back that you just plug and play.
I know last year he had a solid season, right? 1,000 rushing yards almost as a rookie. So I know he has decent potential. He's solid, man. Like you said, he's going to be a flex guy, but don't expect him to win your matchup for you. Just plug him in wherever the bye week's at, and hope that he gives you that 10 points, right? Because that's all you can ask for.
And you're 100% right. He was really good last year, and a lot of people, myself included, grabbed him off the waiver wire in a couple leagues, and he won some games for me. And I really do like him as a player. It's just he's not that kind of guy that's going to get you 25. He'll get you 15, and you should be content with that. Now, for my cold call, I'm going with the Panthers versus the Packers. The offense for the Packers looked great last week, but it was a good matchup against the Steelers, who we talked about earlier. They've just been struggling, and their secondary is pathetic. But the Packers passing game has been pretty spotty this season for the most part, too. They've gotten a lot of injuries they're trying to work through, and I understand that they've got Christian Watson back on the field, and he looked good. He had like 4 catches for, I think, 84 or 85 yards last week, which is great. But he's another guy, just like everyone else on that wide receiver core, that's hit or miss. So I wouldn't be confident plugging him into my lineup. I'd have to see him for a couple more weeks. Now, the Panthers looked awful last week, but they had a really tough matchup against the Bills. Overall, they're a great football team, and when you're playing from behind, your game plan falls apart. And the thing is, the Panthers, they have another tough matchup this week because the Packers have a solid passing defense and a top 3 rushing defense. So Ted McMillan's the only guy that you can play with confidence, but we don't know who's going to be throwing the ball to him yet. And Rico and Chuba, they're in a committee now. So I have no idea who's going to finish with more touches or more fantasy points this week. But that's a game that just makes me a little nervous. And again, as I said, the Packers, they're a great football team, but Josh Jacobs and Tucker Kraft are the only guys that I consider lineup locks. I wouldn't be confident in any of their receivers aside from Romeo Doubs, but keep in mind that the Panthers have a top 10 passing defense. And Jordan Love has been up and down all year. Yes, he looked great last week, and he is, I believe, close to a top 10 quarterback for fantasy purposes, but he's been really up and down. So I think Josh Jacobs is going to have an incredible game, and most likely Tucker Kraft and Ted McMillan too. But I think this game could turn into a defensive battle.
Yeah, I can see how those two defenses, obviously two really good stalwart defenses, could shut each other down. I actually will take the opposite, though. I do think that game will be pretty solid, but I agree with you about wide receiver cores, right? You're not going to start anybody on the Packers with confidence besides Tucker Kraft. But again, I'm not happy with taking either anybody else on the other side either. So to each their own, I guess.
Hey, Ted McMillan, other than that, leave that team alone. Now let's get into our shit calls.
Smells like shit in here.
That's me from last week. I shit the bed pretty bad.
I want to lead this off today with our stinky shit call, Joe. Last week I made a big mistake, man. I trusted in Baker Mayfield to bake, and unfortunately, everything that he baked got cooked. It was burned. The man had 150 passing yards and like a lost turnover and an interception, and he ended up getting me 2 fantasy points this past week. My other league, I ended up spot starting Aaron Rodgers, and I like his trajectory a little bit more for the rest of the season now because of what I saw from Baker. So that was my shit call, man. I trusted in him to bake, and he did it with nobodies for the first few weeks. But we all remember, man, when the NFL gets tape on your quarterback or your system, it's no longer a surprise. Now they know how to play you. So that's what ended up happening. They forced him to beat them in the air, and unfortunately, they could not get it done. So, I mean, they won the game, but they couldn't, get their offense going like they wanted to, right? It was a struggle fest. So, unfortunately, I'm not going to fall for that trick again.
Well, I agreed with you. I thought that Baker was going to cook no matter who he's throwing the ball to, and I thought I started Cade Otton in a few leagues. I expected him to have a big day. And then Tez Johnson, I started him in a couple of leagues, but, he just didn't come through. I mean, they got you a respectable number. I think they both got about 8 or 10 points, but I was thinking they'd clear 12 or 15, no problem. Now, for my shit call, I thought Matthew Golden from the Green Bay Packers would emerge as the wide receiver 1 in Green Bay, but he appears to be 4th in line as a pass catcher behind Tucker Kraft, Romeo Doubs, and now Christian Watson. Jaden Reed should be back in a couple weeks too, so, maybe things will change, but right now he's not getting enough targets to be in your lineup. So just keep him on your bench. And if you did trade for him, don't drop him or anything, but just keep him on your bench until you see something.
Yeah, it happens to the best of us, man. At the end of the day, the good thing is we've been pretty on this year again with a lot of our locks or our targets here. You just have to try to figure out, what works best for you, right? You're not always going to make a good call. But regardless, we appreciate you guys holding us accountable. And in the comments, we do read the comments. So we get to them anytime we can. But we appreciate you guys giving us that feedback as well. Now, it's that time we all hate. It's the end of the show. We want to always, first and foremost, thank you all for joining and tuning in for another episode of the Fantasy Fumble. You guys are the ones that make this happen. So make sure to share, like, follow, and give us any love so that we can continue to make this podcast successful for you guys.
Yeah, we see a lot of comments and a lot of views regarding the trade targets. And if again, if there's a player profile or some questions you have, just throw it in the comments. We will reply.
Yes, we will. And again, we appreciate the love and support, guys. We'll see you here next week at the same time, same place.